When it comes to human rights, few countries are as shrouded in controversy as the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. If you search human rights in North Korea in any search engine, you'll be enveloped by stories of defectors who describe being forced to eat grass to survive, or people being executed en masse for political dysentery, such as owning a Bible or watching a foreign film. With such seemingly harsh punishment for a vast majority of crimes that would seem innocuous to foreign eyes, we can imagine that minority rights, and more specifically LGBT rights, would be practically non-existent, and that people who are openly homosexual would be severely punished, right? Well, as with all things concerning North Korea, the answer is a bit more complicated. Let's take a look. If we're to understand attitudes towards homosexuality in the present-day Hermit Kingdom, we must first gain an understanding of Korean society as a whole. Despite popular belief, homosexuality was not always seen in a negative light in Korea. While not openly discussed, it was seen as more of an open secret. The Samguk Yusa, for example, an old Korean book detailing early Korean history, references flower boys, or young Korean men who dressed as women to appease older Korean widowers. King Gongmin of the Goryeo dynasty had several male lovers. Even one of King Sejong's daughters was a well-known lesbian who frequently slept with her maids. Having said that, modern-day North Korea, a country that still refers to itself by its archaic name Chosun, largely continues this trend of treating homosexuality as an open secret. There is a popular stereotype depicting North Koreans as being oblivious to homosexuality as a whole, and I think that perception stems from an article written by CNN in 2017 about a man who didn't know he was gay until he defected to South Korea because he didn't know what homosexuality was in North Korea. And while that certainly may be the case for him as an individual, as well as others in North Korea, it's important to remember that his story doesn't paint the entire picture of the situation. There are several other stories about gays and lesbians in North Korea. A common source of these stories stems from their time in the Korean People's Army, where men are often away from towns and villages containing women. They will allegedly resort to homosexual acts, often between non-commissioned officers and young recruits. There are also anecdotal reports of North Korean female officers sneaking young female recruits into secluded munitions depots or outposts to have sex. In an article written by Lee Jae-sun, a North Korean defector for nknews.org, titled, "Are There Gay People in North Korea?" Mrs. Lee goes into detail that while she never personally encountered male homosexuality in North Korea, she encountered many lesbians during her life in the DPRK and had many lesbian friends. She further discussed the topic by saying that lesbians were the frequent subjects of rumors and gossip, with many parents forbidding their daughters from seeing their girlfriends, or in some cases resorting to violence, fearing that they may not be attracted to men in the future, impeding their ability to live a normal life. Without spoiling the article, she ends by saying that although homosexuals, or more specifically lesbians, are the subject of gossip, they are not shunned or excluded from North Korean society like their southern sisters are, inferring that North Korean people are somewhat more tolerant of homosexuality than South Korean people are. In another NK News article written by Oliver Hoffman, tells the experiences of a defector named Jimin, BTS unrelated. Jimin rather confusingly reaffirms the claim that most North Koreans hadn't heard of homosexuality until they arrived in South Korea, while simultaneously claiming that same-sex relationships, especially among women, are surprisingly common. Despite Jimin seemingly exhibiting a classic example of doublethink, he clarifies his statement by explaining that North Korean same-sex couples don't see their relationship as homosexual, nor is sex with their same-sex partner referred to as sex, rather as physical affection, or emu in Korean. Despite popular belief, there are no laws forbidding homosexual behavior in North Korea. While outwardly, the North Korean government openly detests homosexuality as an example of foreign decadence that is absent in Korea, and frequently resorts to using homophobic slurs against foreign critics of its regime, inwardly, the government obviously knows that homosexuality exists. Although homosexual couples have no legal status in North Korea and cannot get married, The North Korean government still seems to tolerate them in an unorganized state, as they don't explicitly pose a threat to the regime. This hypothesis, I think, can be confirmed more or less by the Korean Friendship Association, the European-based website with strong ties to North Korea, which released a statement on the DPRK's official stance on homosexuality in the country, stating that, due to tradition in Korean culture, it is not customary for individuals of any sexual orientation to engage in public displays of affection. As a country that has embraced science and rationalism, the DPRK recognizes that many individuals are born with homosexuality as a genetic trait and treats them with due respect. Homosexuals in the DPRK have never been subject to repression, as in many capitalist regimes around the world. However, North Koreans also place a lot of emphasis on social harmony and morals. Therefore, the DPRK formally rejects many characteristics of the popular gay culture in the West, which many perceive to embrace consumerism, classism, and promiscuity. So, what I take away from the above statement is that while North Korea emphatically rejects the gay culture in the West as it conflicts with their idea of social and familial harmony, simply being homosexual and engaging in homosexual behavior within the confines of your own home is not a crime. And while there are reports of North Korea executing homosexuals, the most famous of which being an article from Radio Free Asia in 2011 about North Korean officials allegedly executing 2 lesbians in Jong-Un, we must remember that it's important to take these reports with a grain of salt, as insider information on North Korea, especially in regard to its executions, are unreliable at best. Remember, these are the same insiders that reported the execution of North Korean singer Hyung Sung-wol, who later turned up on North Korean TV alive and well, as well as reports of the execution of Ri Yong-gil, a senior North Korean military official, only for him to show up months later with a promotion. As to whether or not representation of homosexuality in North Korea as far as television and movies exists, it doesn't. And trust me, I of all people would know if there was, but there isn't. Aside from using homosexuality as an instrument to deride foreigners, there is no representation of gay or lesbian North Koreans at all within the country. 0. Negative. None. 없습니다. So, what can we infer about homosexuality in North Korea? While outwardly the North Korean regime depicts homosexuality as an affront to nature and socialist values, on the inside, North Korea seems content on continuing the practices of Chosun by tolerating homosexuality as an open secret, with some defectors even claiming that North Korean people are more tolerant of homosexuals than South Koreans. While some may claim this is debatable in 2019, as LGBT minorities are at least acknowledged in South Korean media, it's important to remember that more often than not, they are not acknowledged in a positive light. While pro-LGBT TV shows and films in South Korea do exist, LGBT minorities are often the subject of scathing ridicule by conservative Koreans, Christians, and the South Korean government, including the incumbent president Moon Jae-in, who is on record for saying, "I am not a fan of homosexuality." The North Korean government, by contrast, seems content in just leaving them alone, as they don't pose a threat to the stability of the regime, which some may argue is better than being ridiculed by your own government. There are pros and cons to both sides here, but having lived in South Korea and being married to a bisexual Korean woman myself, I believe it is possible that everyday North Korean people are more tolerant of homosexuals than their South Korean counterparts. And I attribute this tolerance to a lack of influence from Christianity, which still has a firm grip on the conservative side of South Korea, which is about half the population. That and Christianity is the source of most anti-gay sentiments. This is all speculation, of course, as with most things pertaining to North Korea, we will never know until the country either collapses or liberalizes and allows greater insight into North Korean society. Until then, the true nature of LGBT rights in North Korea remains a mystery. While I will concede that North Korea's track record for treating homosexuals is probably a lot better than places like Saudi Arabia or Pakistan, I think it's a stretch to say that they're on par with that of the United States, Canada, or Western Europe. But what do you think? How are gays treated in your country? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you, and have a great day.